Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating and honestly super common modern mystery. It's this concept called the golden handcuffs of monthly payments. We're going to look at exactly why earning a supposedly good salary often still leaves so many of us feeling incredibly restricted financially.
Have you ever noticed this weird paradox? Picture a friend, a coworker, or hey, maybe even yourself. Someone can be pulling in $80,000 a year, which is a fantastic salary by almost any historical standard, and yet they still wake up feeling financially anxious every single month. They always seem to be living paycheck to paycheck, despite bringing in what really should be a very comfortable income. And the craziest part, this has become completely normal.
And here's the absolute kicker you need to understand. These folks aren't broke in the traditional sense. They're definitely not unemployed, and they aren't reckless with their cash either. They're just constantly behind. If you have ever felt this way, you should know that this anxiety almost never comes from laziness or a lack of intelligence. It's actually a structural issue, and that's exactly what we're going to break down today.
Okay, let's dive into Section 1, the high-income paradox and the illusion of financial health. This right here brilliantly illustrates the paradox. People have solid, stable jobs. They rent or own places in really nice neighborhoods. They drive nice financed cars. They take these beautiful vacations, even if it's on credit cards. And they have food delivery subscriptions they barely even think about anymore. From the outside looking in, everything is just peachy. It looks perfectly financially healthy. But the reality, millions of people across the US and Europe living these exact lives are internally just one unexpected expense away from a total stress meltdown.
Let's move to Section 2, the monthly budget drain. Where exactly does all that money go?
Let's look at the math and see how this builds up. Say someone earns $6,000 a month before taxes. Sounds awesome, right? But hold on. After taxes, healthcare deductions, and retirement, that take-home pay drops to around $4,300. And then the money just starts flying out the door. $1,800 for rent or a mortgage, gone. $550 for a car payment, gone. $350 for student loans, $800 for groceries and utilities. Just like that, you're down to about $800 for literally everything else in life. And that chunk has to cover insurance, restaurants, random online purchases, weekend trips, coffee, streaming services, basically all the spending that never feels serious in the moment. It is a literal death by 1,000 cuts. By the end of the month, that $6,000 income has completely evaporated to zero.
When you actually look at those numbers, you realize this vanishing act isn't some huge personal financial failure. It's because most people don't actually buy things outright anymore. They buy access to things through monthly obligations. A car becomes a payment. A phone becomes a payment. Furniture, education, even social status, they all just turn into monthly payments. Modern life is practically designed from the ground up around these fixed obligations.
Which brings us to Section 3, the psychology of payments and disconnecting from true cost. You know, as humans, we're totally wired to evaluate if we can afford something based on short-term emotional comfort, not the long-term math. Just consider this dangerous disconnect. A $45,000 car, that number, it sounds terrifying. It sounds totally excessive. But $620 a month? Suddenly, well, that feels completely manageable. A city apartment for $2,000 a month feels normal because everyone around you is doing it. A vacation doesn't feel expensive when the credit card magically transforms it into a future problem. We get tricked every single day by this manageable monthly illusion.
And man, does that illusion fuel lifestyle inflation. That's the quiet little process where your spending just automatically creeps up to match your new income. When you get a raise, it just feels like permission, right? A small bump in salary means a slightly nicer apartment, then a slightly newer car, better restaurants, more convenience. Eventually, someone earning literally twice as much as they used to still feels completely financially restricted because they only expanded their financial structure, they didn't expand their actual freedom.
And don't kid yourself, companies know exactly how our brains work here. We're constantly bombarded with tactics like only $3.99 a month, or just 29 euros today, or zero down. Modern consumer economies rely heavily on keeping you and me as permanent monthly customers. Notice how they rarely talk about the total cost anymore? The entire goal is to remove the psychological pain of spending money today because they know we are super sensitive to immediate discomfort, but honestly terrible at calculating long-term consequences.
Let's hit Section 4, the cost of lifestyle inflation and the math of upgrades.
$84,000. Just let that number sink in for a second. Imagine you decide to spend an extra $700 a month upgrading your lifestyle after a few promotions at work. You know, a nicer apartment, a better car, more finance stuff. That equals $8,400 a year. Over 10 years, that is an $84,000 cost.
And remember, that's just the raw cash. That's not even counting the massive wealth you'd have if you had invested that money instead with average market returns. Small, recurring decisions compound so quietly, but so aggressively over time.
But honestly, the real issue isn't just the cold, hard math. It's the psychological exhaustion that tags along with it. When your paycheck is already carved up and handed out to monthly payments before the month even starts, you are literally trapped in income dependency. You can't easily pivot careers, you can't take cool risks, you certainly can't just step back to reduce your work stress. Work starts feeling way less optional because the lifestyle you built demands constant, non-stop income maintenance. It's a complete loss of flexibility, and that is exactly why some really high earners actually feel surprisingly fragile.
This leads us to Section 5, buying freedom over status and redefining wealth. So the crucial mindset shift really boils down to asking yourself this one question. How much control over my future am I giving away for this purchase? Financially intelligent people completely flip the script. They aren't necessarily living these extreme minimalist, off-the-grid lifestyles, but they get that every single recurring payment quietly eats away at their future freedom. So they stop asking, can I afford the monthly payment? Instead, they ask this question. Suddenly, a financed luxury car stops looking so impressive when you realize it equals 5 straight years of reduced life flexibility.
Because true financial stability, it actually looks surprisingly ordinary. The financially secure person is usually the one driving the slightly older, less flashy car. They keep their phone a year or two longer. They actively avoid upgrading their life every time they get a raise, and they value being kind of invisible over showing off their status. Wealthy thinking people practice restraint because they deeply understand the emotional trap of permanent lifestyle expansion. By skipping those constant upgrades, they ironically create the exact freedom that everyone else is exhausting themselves trying to chase. Less anxiety, more control over their time, and the ultimate superpower, the ability to just say no.
And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway of this explainer. A high salary alone absolutely does not create financial peace. The structure surrounding that salary matters so much more. Living paycheck to paycheck isn't just a low-income problem anymore. For so many middle-class workers today, it's become a structural lifestyle pattern, one built entirely around consumption, immediate convenience, and some pretty intense social pressure. But once you see the matrix clearly, it changes how you look at literally every purchase.
So, I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on today. Ask yourself right now, is your monthly spending structure quietly buying your future freedom, or is it just locking you into permanent financial anxiety? Really think about the invisible structure you've built around your own income. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. If you enjoyed this kind of calm, reality-based breakdown, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more insights just like this. See you next time.